Americans have a lot of can-do spirit. They can do anything. Go to the moon, cure polio, even run other people's countries. And I don't mean run other people's countries in like this sense. I mean like literally move to another country and get elected to run it. So today we are going to look at a bunch of Americans who wound up in charge of non-American countries. But before we get to any of that, shout out to today's video sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is a fantastic website where you can learn all sorts of useful skills in realms like art and computers and music and cooking and more. The first 500 people who sign up to Skillshare using the link in the thing below will get access to everything Skillshare has to offer for 2 months for free. We will talk more about Skillshare in a bit. So anyway, let me tell you the story of Janet Jagan. Janet Rosenberg was a woman from Chicago. She grew up in the 1920s in a middle-class Jewish American family. She got her education at Wayne State University and Cook County Medical School. And while she was at medical school, she met this handsome foreign student from Guyana named Jagan. And they fell in love, and he was like, "Oh, Janet, won't you please be my wife and come back with me to Guyana?" And so they did. They got married and they moved back to that country. And then they decided to give up their dreams of practicing medicine and instead become radical left-wing Guyanese politicians. In 1950, the Jagans formed that country's first major political party, and in 1953, they won the country's first democratic elections. Cheddi Jagan became Guyana's first prime minister, and Janet Jagan became a trusted member of his administration. Over the next few decades, there was a lot of political turmoil in Guyana involving the Jagans. A lot of this involved the drama of the Cold War and the fact that the Jagans were considered too pro-communist. Janet even lost her US citizenship at some point as part of Washington's attempts to marginalize her. But anyway, just to skip ahead a bit, Cheddi Jagan ultimately died in office in 1997. This made Janet head of the party, and she ran to replace him in that year's Guyanese presidential election, and she won. Though the fact that she was a white American woman running to lead a country of mostly blacks and Indians was not entirely uncontroversial, sort of like reverse Obama, I guess. Anyway, let's look at a clip of her talking, just because I think it's kind of wild how this ordinary-seeming American grandma wound up as president of a country in South America.
A lot of things have been going on. Buildings opened, investments. I've opened several aspects of investment in our country, and many things. Life goes on in spite of the fact that we had the problem of the opposition, but then most countries have problems with their opposition.
Story number 2 is Eamon De Valera. So back in 1879, an Irish woman named Kate left Ireland and moved to New York. And shortly after moving there, she hooked up with this Spanish guy named Vivian De Valera, and they had a son named Edward. The father died shortly after that, and for reasons that aren't entirely known, Kate decided that she didn't want to raise Edward, so she sent him to Ireland to live with her family. And little Edward wound up becoming one of the domineering figures of Irish politics in the 20th century, serving as prime minister and then president of the country. When you read biographies of him, you often hear that it was insecurity over the weirdness of his childhood that made him such a determined Irish patriot. This includes the reason why he changed his first name from Edward to Eamon, which is a more traditional Irish name, and the reason why he was so obsessed with speaking Gaelic, and why he wanted everyone else in Ireland to speak Gaelic too. But Eamon did sometimes still play the American card when it was convenient for him. In 1916, for instance, he was involved in this big violent uprising against Ireland's British rulers and sentenced to death, and his family helped stop that execution by proving that he was a US citizen, because the Brits couldn't possibly execute an American, could they? I like this quote here from a memo from the British government. "It is an astonishing revelation that after all of the bullying His Majesty's government have put up with from this man, to find out that he is not even technically a British subject." After that whole episode, Eamon De Valera actually moved briefly back to America in 1919-1920 in order to drum up money and support for the Irish independence cause among Irish Americans.
Ireland's cause is not Ireland's cause only, it is the cause of the world. It is the cause of right and of justice and of true democracy everywhere.
In doing this, he helped encourage this belief that Irish Americans should continue to care about Ireland forever. A belief that I guess sort of continues to this day. Story number 3 is about Rama the Ninth. So in the early 20th century, the royal family of Thailand was in this big mess. Everyone was so inbred that they were dying all over the place at very young ages. At that time, one of the king's brothers, Prince Maki, was really obsessed with the West. He was technically in line to the throne, but he didn't take it that seriously because he had other brothers who were in line before him. So Prince Maki lived mostly in Europe and America, 2 places that he liked a lot more than Thailand. He had one son in Germany and another son in Boston. He also had the good sense to marry someone who wasn't a blood relative. Because the Thai royal family was so sickly, by 1935 everyone was dead except for these 2 young princes. The German-born prince became king for a few years, but then he committed suicide under rather suspicious circumstances in 1946. This made his American-born brother the new king, King Rama the Ninth. The new king was 18 years old, but had only lived in Thailand for 4 years. And thanks to his healthy genes, Rama the Ninth wound up being the longest-serving king in Thai history, and indeed one of the longest-serving kings in the history of the world. He only died a couple years ago. And to this day, he remains the only monarch of any country ever born on American soil. Though I guess we'll see how things go with Miss Markle in the UK. Story number 4 is not just about one leader, but rather an entire country, Liberia. Long before the American Civil War, a lot of states in the northern US had abolished slavery, but every time they did this, a question arose as to what to do with all of the freed black people. A lot of whites, even very progressive whites, did not think that blacks could ever become Americans. Instead, a lot of people genuinely thought, in sort of the racist attitude of the time, that the most compassionate thing to do would be to pick them all up and send them back to Africa. So in the 1820s, a bunch of progressive white Americans bought this tiny parcel of land in West Africa, and they set it up to be this independent republic for free blacks from America, the Republic of Liberia. And for many years, free blacks were sent there from the United States to start a new life. Between 1841 and 1904, 10 of the first 12 presidents of Liberia were black men born in the US. The first one being President J.J. Roberts, good name, who was born in Virginia, and the last being Garretson Wilmot Gibson, who was born in Maryland. In fact, 4 of the 10 American-born presidents of Liberia were born in Maryland. So you see, Maryland, you people did produce some presidents after all. But you know, it is important to remember that Liberia was not at all a success story. It was really just another colonial society set up by foreigners in Africa, with little concern for what the Africans themselves wanted. In the long run, there wound up being a lot of violent strife between Liberia's American-born elite and the native Liberians who were already living there. The fact that they were black foreigners didn't somehow magically make it all better. And lastly, we have story number 5. So there is this very powerful political family in Greece called the Papandreous. The patriarch of the family, a guy called Georgios Papandreou, was prime minister a couple of times, including during the Second World War, in which he led an anti-Nazi government in exile. During that time, his son Andreas Papandreou decided to emigrate to the United States, and he lived and worked there for 20 years. He went to school in America, he worked in America, he joined the US military, he became a US citizen, he married an American woman, and he even had an American son named George, born in Minnesota. Andreas eventually moved back to Greece to serve in his father's second administration in the 1960s. He eventually became prime minister himself in the 80s and 90s. And then, many years later, his American-born son, George, decided to also move to Greece and become involved in Greek politics. And he too eventually became prime minister in the late 2000s. George Papandreou is actually probably one of the most famous Greek prime ministers of modern times because he was very much the face of like the Greek debt crisis that captivated the world in 2010.
And a number of times, and I said at the very beginning when I became prime minister, I said the deficit is a symptom of deeper problems in our society or in our economy or in the running of our state.
So there you go, 3 generations of Greek prime ministers, and 2 of the 3 were US citizens. The Papandreous are actually one of the most interesting political families I think you will ever learn about. They had so many crazy adventures and family drama. I know, drama in a Greek family, who would have guessed? But you know what else Greeks are very good at? Cooking. I, however, suck at cooking, which is one of the reasons why I like Skillshare, today's video sponsor, because it is full of videos that can make you better at just about anything, even making delicious Greek food. In addition to hundreds of videos on cooking and baking, Skillshare is also home to thousands of videos on other useful topics, including stuff like interior decorating and morning routines and foreign languages and study hacks. And that's in addition to all of the videos that you probably already know they have about graphic design and programming and business. Right now I'm trying to get more into this trendy thing called bullet journaling, or Bojo, which is when you document and organize your life in little notebooks with like little charts and graphs and stuff. And of course, Skillshare has tons of videos on that. I was watching this hour-long Skillshare video about bullet journaling the other day, run by this really hardcore woman named Leslie, who was like really serious about bullet journaling, which is exactly what you want from a teacher. And if you want to have access to some good hardcore lessons about something you care about, I have a good offer for you. You can get 2 free months of Skillshare if you just sign up using the link in the thing below. Okay, let us close down this video by doing a little bit more viewer mail. I have here a parcel from my friend Antonio from Toronto. Antonio says, "Hey JJ, big fan of yours. I was in Porto recently, which is a city in Portugal, and I remembered that you have a great flag collection, so I decided to bring you a flag of the city." Oh boy, here it is. Check that out. Very sharp. He says the flag used to have a dragon emblazoned on it, but thanks to Salazar, the longtime dictator of Portugal, all monarchical symbols had to be removed from municipal flags. The words across the flag mean the old, very noble, always loyal, and unvanquished city of Porto. Well, thank you very much for this very charming flag, Antonio. I like how it has that kind of weird pattern, sort of like an umbrella. As usual, if you want to send me mail, just drop me a line at jjmccullough@gmail.com and I will give you my mailing address. That's all for this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to check out that awesome deal from Skillshare, and I will see you all next week.